So tell me how you came to cinema.
Well, I'll mention it today again, but it's incredibly curious. And you can actually Google me, so you don't think I'm making this up for this or Crimson Peak. The first movie I saw was at 4 years old, Wuthering Heights. And it was such a, I was 4, my mother took me to the cinema. It was a very cheap cinema. I was showing, is what is called in Mexico a rat and a break cinema, because they give you a break to kill the rats. And we were watching the movie, and I fell asleep in the middle of a very tortuous, tempestuous scene, and I woke up in the middle of another really Gothic moment. And that movie, now the movie I saw doesn't match the movie that is, you know? I see the one with Olivier and so forth, and I find it really tame compared to my memory of seeing that movie, but that's the first movie I saw.
And from where did it go next then, at
Well,
4 years old? And then where did you really...
Then we went to Mexican cinema that was on TV, meaning wrestler movies, cowboys versus undead, things like that, and all the Universal monsters, which played every Sunday on TV, in black and white, subtitled, beautiful, and they were very different. What I thought was, this is so different from TV. Like TV was color and this and that. Well, I went through black and white for a period, but they were so beautiful. And I think the one that, when I was a young kid, the one that blew my mind was Creature from the Black Lagoon. That moment when he's swimming under Julie Adams. And I just thought, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And the creature is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And Julie Adams, so go figure what Freudian misconnections happened there. But I go there, and then the matinees, you know. And the matinees in Mexico, they were Sunday morning, and they consisted of really, really bad prints of really, really old movies. Like one of them, Tarzan and His Bride, for example, which was high on our list because it had brief nudity. So we would go to the matinee.
Very important, by the way.
Very important when you're a growing, healthy boy
Yeah.
in Mexico in the 60s. But also, they were the most ill-conceived because they had B horror movies, Tarzan, they had a Fred McMurray comedy. Everything was like a hodgepodge. And the parents never bothered to check what they were. So we ended up seeing later, as I grew up, we would go to the theater and see Terence Fisher, Bloody Hammer, Amicus, movies that were really adult in violence and sex and innuendo for the time. And my parents just thought, well, the movies are safe, you know. They thought the kids can go to the movies. It was...
So you responded to, as we all do, to certain moments, visual moments, nudity, etc. But what else did you respond to in those films? Like how did they really connect with you when you look back?
I really think what was most beautiful is, I'm growing up in Mexico in the 60s, and all you had was flammable fabrics in your clothes, horrible garish colors in those clothes, and the horror movies were about beautiful fabrics, beautiful colors. They were mostly period when I was growing up. They were faux Victorian or you know, whatever Roger Corman could afford at the time, you know, and it was quite fascinating that they were, and all the Universal monsters were classical in that universal way that combined every period known to man in some instances, and I just thought it was a different world, and a beauty. For me, the monsters were always beauty. I never saw them as scary.
Did you identify with the monsters?
Yeah, mostly with Frankenstein's creature. I mean, for me, when I was in my teens, I saw James Whale's Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, and I saw them very different than when I was a child, because as a child, you catch this, you catch that, but as a teenager, I thought, this is me. A creature that is not in the world. And then obviously I read the novel, and it remains in my life one of those books that changed my life. You know, I read it and I felt there was such poetry, and to know that it was written by a girl in her teens, you know, that it was really such a beautiful poem to an outsider, an outsider creature. And I really, it's strange because fairy tales and monsters and horror in my mind, they go hand in hand. I cannot really, and I don't think there is really a line. It's a continuum. I think my theory is that they emerge from there. Horror tales emerge from the folk tales, yes.
You read a lot of fairy tales when you were a kid?
Yes, and some of them.
A verbal part of your culture, like your mother was reading these to you?
Well, no, my mother was not the reading out loud kind, but my nanny, or whoever was my nanny at the time, because they changed, they used to tell me these lurid stories. And I was in 64, 68, when I was very young, we were still on the tail end of radio in Mexico. So we would have dinner, and then at night, we would lay on the counter of the kitchen and we would listen to a radio novela. And one of them was called The Mad Monk. And The Mad Monk was all these lurid stories about people getting their eyes gouged out. And so the nanny was very free with her amount of gore in her tales. She told us stories about men that gambled with the devil and were crushed by 2 rocks. I remember that one. And things like that. And then, curiously enough, in my illustrated books, there came a tale that I didn't find until 15 years later. It was part of an Andrew Lang collection of Victorian fairy tales. I think it was the Brown Book of Fairy Tales. But I read it as a kid, and God knows why, it was in an anthology, and it was called The 7 Wise Counsels, or Pieces of Advice. And in one scene, there was a giant with the skeleton of his bride, dead, enmeshed with his beard. And he would wander howling in the catacombs of an Arabian city, and whoever didn't like his bride, he would crush his head. Now, this is in a children's book. I love it. And everything, I was like a tuning fork for weird stuff.
And was this around you when you looked outside Mexico, society around you? Was this a reflection at all, or was this completely in your headspace?
I really think that I was in a certain vibration, and I gravitated to those things. Like, I was part of the Virgin Mary Society when I was a kid, but the priest chose that there's one Gothic cathedral in my city, which is completely insane, because it's like finding a pyramid in the middle of Paris, an Aztec pyramid, and the Virgin Mary Society used to meet in the catacombs of that cathedral. Now, what are the odds that a bunch of Mexican kids are going to meet in the catacombs of a Gothic cathedral? Very, very slim.
Great imagery, though.
Great, and we were there, and one day we saw a niche was loose, and we pried inside, and we saw the feet of the body with the soles of the shoe, and they were rotted away, so you could see the bones and the tissue. and this is on a session with the Virgin Mary Society. So, go figure. And on top of that, you pile up that if you read the Bible as a kid, some of the episodes are so gory, like the Maccabee brothers being put in a furnace, mutilated, and the saints and Catholic imagery in a Mexican church is only a little less gory than Filipino Catholic imagery. But purple Christ with a piece of bone sticking out.
So when you made the move to film, it's clear where the influences came from. It just organically grew out of what you were interested in. Tell me about the fascination with Spain and the Civil War.
That came much later because, when I was growing up, Franco was in the news, but he was always treated very benignly in the international news, almost like a cook or an eccentric guy with a funny name. When I was in my teens, I started reading about it, and it was very shocking, as every teen through Hemingway or, through, there was a guy called Richard Lapin in my city that spoke about it a little. And then later in life, in my late teens, early 20s, I met and befriended a guy that was a refugee, a historian called Emilio Garcia Riera, the greatest Mexican film historian ever. And through him and through all the refugees, that he told me, look, most of the Mexican film industry is full with refugees. Actors, directors, beyond Buñuel, set designers, sound designers. And I started realizing how close.
And you were meeting and working with all these people?
I was. These are from the golden era of cinema.
This is pre you.
Yeah, a lot of them had died by that time. But Emilio and his generation were very close to Buñuel. So they all, I was friends with Gabriel Figueroa. And Gabby and everybody was saying, oh, you need to meet Luis. You know, he's gonna find you very funny and you're gonna get along. And 2 weeks before I met Don Luis, he passed away.
Was Buñuel a major influence when you actually started looking at his work?
You know, actually, Los Olvidados, you know, The Young and the Damned, when I saw that, I mean, two movies changed me into thinking film were art. It was, I saw 2001, like all my generation, but then I saw Taxi Driver. My uncle took me to Taxi Driver, very misguided idea, but I thought this is incredibly profound. This is talking about things nobody's talking about. And then Buñuel's Los Olvidados, because it was in Spanish. And it was not on TV. I saw it projected on a 60mm print. I was part of a cinema club, like everybody in my generation.
So this means that Buñuel was not on TV?
It was not. This one was not. This one was not. And Buñuel was on TV with El Bruto, Susana. Yeah, his Mexican works, but mostly, I think Los Olvidados remained for many years still a damned film.
Semi-censored.
Semi-censored, you know, famously offensive, blah blah blah. And I watched it in a little screen, 16mm, but it was a screen. It was not TV. And I thought, this is in Spanish, and it's the most beautiful piece of art I've ever seen. And it's profound and brave. And I was by then into Dickens, and I thought, this is the side that Dickens never crosses that line. In fact, it has an episode that is very, very similar to Oliver Twist in a way, you know, where the kid is given the money and said, we trust him, but that kid ends up dead in the garbage. So it's really fascinating. It was very fascinating to me because as a kid, I always thought nobody talks about infancy the way I remember infancy, which was super tough and horrible and full of fears and fraught with danger. That's why I thought movies like Spirit of the Beehive, Los Olvidados, Roald Dahl in general as a writer, whenever somebody spoke about childhood as that period where you are almost invisible and you can be dented by things that don't see you, like war, poverty, things that are steamrolling the entire society. The kids are the silent victims in a way, and I thought that was very powerful.
Did you see Jean Vigo's films at that point? You did.
I saw them a little later. I mean, I saw Zero in Conduct and La Talente as a projectionist. So what we used to do, which is what I do here at TIFF, this is exactly the same. That was my formation. Was I would sell the tickets, spool the film, introduce the film, and then say, I'll see you after the film for discussion. And most people going to a cinema club were 30, 40, and I was 18 to 20, you know? But I was always really, really ferocious about arguing, and they prepared you because the people that went knew their stuff. So, you know, we would argue, and Vigo, I thought Vigo had a beauty. In fact, I make him a little homage in one of my early shorts, Doña Lupe, very oblique homage, but I just love the purity of his cinema.
It feels like the history of cinema is alive and present in your work. I mean, you you engage with it all the time. I mean, you're here in the building, you're doing conversations with some of your favorite films. Tell me what you pull away from that work. I mean, a lot of filmmakers I know, they see the work and then they become filmmakers and they don't really engage. They cut themselves off in a funny way from cinema, but you are completely involved. Talk a little bit about why, Guillermo. What does that feed you?
I watch 2 movies every day or 3 movies every day. I rewatch every day, no matter what.
2 or 3 films a day?
A day. I can watch 40 minutes of it, or some obscure movie, or some movies that nobody likes obsess me, like Ridley Scott's The Counselor, which I have watched now over 30 times with the script next to me, because I love the rhythms of that movie. But I always think, people say, oh, it's very nice of you to do these classes, and I say it's for me. It actually reminds you, it's like when I served as a juror in Cannes this year, it was the most amazing renewal of my most intimate personal pact with movie making. And it actually changed my life in many, many ways. And these chats changed my life. I love telling people, look, let's discuss the movies like you would discuss a book or an opera, or let's not just discuss the story and the actors, which is a level of penetration on a film that is very superficial. I always say, let's go beyond the screenplay. Let's not discuss the screenplay that much. Let's discuss the camera work. Let's discuss the choices, formal choices. Let's discuss the screenplay from a symbolic or sociologic or anthropological point of view. But let's not just talk about that. And another thing that is useful is, let's not just talk about the director sometimes. You know, sometimes you can see how the director, and this is very fascinating, because particularly with Dickens or Bronte or any of the people that we're watching in this cycle, it's like an opera conducted by someone, directed by someone, every time different. The magic flute is different every time, because the director and the conductor and the singer, they're going to be so different. And film is thought in purely commercial terms. They say remake. This is a remake of, when it's based on a book, I say it's a version. It's not a remake, it's a version, because it's, again, somebody taking a text and saying, this is what I can do with audiovisuals. So it's very good for me. And it makes me, somebody said, you want to learn, read. You want to really make it yours, teach. You know, and I think it's true.
So interesting, because we're at a point in time where there's so many big entertainment budget movies, comic book heroes in particular, where people think that the movies have really dumbed down in a way. And you would go to Cannes and obviously have a very, very different experience, because that's not what Cannes is about at all. It's exactly the opposite. So tell me about this moment where we are in cinema, where there's the franchise movies are dominating, I think, the public spaces, but there's this other, the margins are where some of us think the more interesting work lies. Well, there seems to be this split now. I think that
every, we try to impose a narrative structure to our lives, but in reality, this has been true. You go back to the 30s, 40s, this was true. That big Hollywood entertainment was the norm, and more obscure or struggling cinema was tossed to the side. And especially the moment every national industry starts, I mean, if you think about the quota in English film, for example, which is in effect still during the time of Lean or Carol Reed and post-war.
We had a quota here in Canada.
Yeah, and Mexico had a quota. You think back then people were saying we need to impose a quota in Europe because American film is dominating everything. So that has not changed. What I think is strange is the way we consume image has completely changed. And I'll tell you, the 2 words that scare me the most when talking about media is pipeline and concept and content. Studios say or pipeline and or content, as if it was sewage or oil, makes no difference.
Product was the word I always heard in Hollywood, exactly.
Yeah,
it's product.
But it's so much more scary when you say pipeline, because you're talking about an endless flow of a substance that is not easily identifiable. And I think the audience now, many times, I do think that film is changing its positions in the relevance of our daily life. I do. I think that when entertainment can come in quick clips, and you know, some people don't mind seeing a little kitten playing the piano for 3 minutes, that's good enough, or watching a clip of Mad Max's, George Miller's Mad Max on the same tablet. The relationship we have with images is much more disposable in a way. And I think that the danger we have, for me, is that images are many times heightened, but have no concept, no content inside, and they are consumable. And you know, we have to just get rid of them. And
So we don't have the time to think in the same kind of way,
no,
or pause,
but even
or
even the time
reflect.
for them to affect us
Or
in the
affect
same
us.
way. I mean, you remember Cronenberg spoke beautifully about it on Videodrome, about the image as a virus. You know, the image as a virus that infects you and permeates you. Like I am, some people say Christ lives in me, or, you know, the Frankenstein creature lives in me. But it's very hard to find something that can take that almost spiritual power that the image used to have. I think it's changing, and I'm not lamenting it. I'm not lamenting it. I'm mentioning it in the same way that language evolves and music evolves, audiovisual storytelling is evolving. And it's fine. I mean, we just need to say it's not so much the content as the content and the way we're reading them.
Talk to me a bit about virtual reality. You've done a couple of VR experiments.
Well, it's very interesting because it's closely related to video games, and closely related to the fact that I think the younger audiences want to be in immersive cinema, you know, and I think that you can see movies now that are very immersive, and other movies that remain objective storytelling, that take you through the adventure, but you're not part of it, and VR it starts to merge video gaming, first-person narrative with a certain structure and so forth. And I think it's interesting because we're heading towards the mono-platform era where, I mean, we're there already, but we're in the infancy. We're in the Model T, you know, where you get all your audiovisual feedback, because I wouldn't even say entertainment as it's evolving so fast, in a multi-platform but mono-server. You know, you can get it on your phone, on your iPad, on your TV, and you can get music, books, anything you need. It's truly instant, and you get instant access. I mean, when you remember, and this again is not a lamentation, it's an observation. When we watched The Godfather as kids, it was my first soundtrack that I bought on LP. My first LP was The Godfather, because the only way I could relive the movie was to listen to the music. And then you waited, and 5, 6, 7 years later, it revived on a revival cinema or a cinema club. So the quality was precious. The substance was precious because it was rare. I think that now, if I want to watch, I'm exaggerating, but if I want to watch a Max Ophüls movie, it's likable that I can download it from Fandor or one of those more obscure servers, or iTunes or whatever has it, you know.
So you don't lament this change. It's inevitable. So what's going to happen how will it affect the films you make, or how will it affect cinema as a whole?
Well, you know, I really don't know. I think that what I strive to is to connect deeply with audiences that like what I do, even if the audience at large does or doesn't. It makes no difference to me. I make weird movies no matter what size the movie is, and they're not for everyone. And a lot of people may be puzzled or say, why did he do this way? But I only do things that I hope speak to somebody in the same fetishistic way that I was spoken to by people that got high on their own supply. Because I get high on my own supply. I make the movies because I want them, you know, and I whether it's robots and monsters duking it out, or it's a post-war fable, or whatever it is, they're done because I wanna see them. So that's my aspiration. Is some people will connect with those. I don't know what is going to happen, nor do I think it will care about us. What happens is evolution, and evolution is truly brutish and violent in its way. It's a wave, you know, and it just keeps pushing. And you know, soon we'll be remembered as a strange operetta director.
I was about to say, will it become like opera?
Yeah,
Will cinema become
or
like...
even more operetta will be, and in my case, truly weird operetta. But I think it's still. I mean, what will happen with cinema as we knew it? I think that I love when Quentin pushes a format, or when Nolan, who has all the power, pushes a format, preserves film. In the same way that I am very jealously guarding the art of physical makeup effects and set construction in my movies, I want to keep making handmade movies. You know, I think that...
Tell me why that's important.
It's important because for me, I honestly think I make movies to meet the characters that I create and to be in the places I write about. So when I enter the house on Crimson Peak, it's like entering, as if I had traveled to the furthest regions of Asia and I have entered a temple that has been standing for 3,000 years. It makes no difference that I'm there every day, checking the colors, making sure that the decay is the right degree of decay. The first day when I enter with the actors, it's like a travel. It's a travel agency. And when I meet Tom Hiddleston socially, I'm interested, yes, but I'm so much more interested when I meet the character on the day, you know? And by that time, we own it. Both of us own that character.
So there still has to be a human part to it.
I think so. I think that is very important to, if I walk in and I see a green screen, nothing happens to me. I mean, when I'm directing the monsters and the robots in Pacific Rim, I'm directing animation. I do pantomime, I direct the camera because it's virtual, I can move it, and so on and so forth, but it's a different reward. It's a different reward. It's the things that are there physically, I also think it multiplies the capacity for the random accident that creates great things. Like somebody will sculpt his way, the mold will extract the plastic, and the plastic will have a little texture, a little this, a little that. The painting is a different hand, and little by little, and then we light that, and it reacts with a light that is bouncing accidentally off a beam that is not painted, and things happen.
It's like the imperfections of the real.
Yeah, imperfections are beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, David doesn't use special effects. Well, he uses special effects, but not visual special effects in the same way. And I think he completely agrees with your approach. When you see it, those objects are never, ever completely perfect. There's something about them that feels...
A flaw that...
Yeah.
But you see, when you think about a set that we build, the other thing that, and this is completely perverse, because when I see sets that I love, I know they're going to be destroyed. That this is an ephemeral thing, that we built a stadium-size set that is going to be in the movie for 30, 40, 50 minutes, whatever it is, or less sometimes, and that once we leave, it will never be again.
Did you as a child have a fascination with miniatures?
Yes, of course. I still paint them. I'm a miniature painter, and I still paint model kids to this day. I wish I had the time. The last one I painted was in New Zealand.
Which kind? What kind of model kits do you paint?
Well, right now I have pending a big kit of Lon Chaney on the makeup chair, trying false teeth, and his whole kit is there.
So these are kits out of the movies.
Yes, yes. Well, there are kits that fans did in the 80s or 90s during the height of the garage kit craze. And now they're very rare. Like this kit I bought and somebody had already painted it, but horribly painted. So I have to strip the paint. I have to paint it with flat gray base. And then I have to paint every object there. But you go into a Zen place. And I think I'm a miniature filmmaker in that sense. Except my miniatures cost a lot of money and they're very big.
It's funny, the contradiction, the ephemerality of the sets, but the permanency of what you've created.
Yeah, well, one hopes. It really is. I remember when I was a kid. Yes, you think this is immortal. You know, we're doing this. When my first film came from the pharmacy, the Super 8 reel, I thought this will live forever, right? I think it's all an illusion, but you know, within the layer of chalk that we will be geologically as a species in a few million years, yes.
There might be a piece of celluloid somewhere.
I mean, the receipt from the supermarket and the complete works of Shakespeare will be in the same layer of chalk, you know. So it'll be fun to see what people think about that then.